Welcome everyone joining us today. I'm Michael Paul Miller, Peninsula College Pub Gallery of Art Director and Professor of Art. Glad to be here with Brian Goodman to discuss his artistic process and vision with a particular focus on his series entitled Manzanar, Their Footsteps Remain, 40 Years of Photography. Brian is a professional and award-winning artist who worked for decades in the LA area before more recently relocating to Port Townsend, Washington. He studied photography and design at Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem and at the Otis Institute of Parsons School of Design in LA. His photography covers a number of genres, including international portraiture, historical studies of the human experience, landscapes, and photographic abstraction. His artwork appears in multiple publications and has been exhibited in galleries throughout the United States. I'm so pleased that you're able to be with us here today. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Michael.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Can you tell us a bit more about what made you decide to be an artist and why you chose photography as your medium?
I have to go back a long time to answer this one. My father was a graphic designer and an illustrator, and not professionally because he had to make a living back in those days when I came along. And but there was always that influence there. And I also always loved looking at photographs, and magazines that I used to constantly look at as a kid were National Geographic, Life magazine. There was a publication for a while called Geo. And not only was it wonderful looking at the photography, but it was kind of an entrance to the world as a whole, because the photographs were from all over the world. I dabbled and tried my hand at other art processes, for sure during school, and nothing ever really stuck. And I had picked up my first camera when I was 9 years old, and it's basically never left my side. Other newer cameras have now come around, and I don't use that original camera, of course, anymore, but I've been doing this since I was 9 years old.
What's the best advice you've received from an artist?
I'm not sure you're going to want to hear this one, Michael. When I was in school in Jerusalem, I actually got very frustrated with the program at one point, and decided to ditch class, which was our critique day, and went out and was strolling around the old city of Jerusalem taking pictures. And a woman started walking towards me. I unfortunately do not remember her name, but she was carrying a Leica camera and a handheld light meter. So I knew she was not a tourist. And she came up. I was using a twin lens reflex camera and a tripod. And she came up, introduced herself, and asked me what I was doing, and told her. And she invited me for tea that evening. And we talked about her work. She had been a photojournalist for 45 years. And I saw some of her work, talked about the program I was in, and I showed her my portfolio. And at some point in the conversation, she looked at me straight in the eye and she said, "Get out of there." And I looked at her and I said, "What?" She said, "Get out of there. They're going to ruin you." And she said, "You have a wonderful eye and you need to get out there and just do it." And that has kind of always stuck with me, and nothing negative about schooling, because I wish I had more of it, actually. But that statement kind of directed me to really get out there and explore and experiment and learn my craft, and it all worked out pretty good. So
experiential learning is a great way to learn too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and yet you still went to the Otis Institute of Parsons School of Design after that.
I did. I came back to the States and got involved in the photo program there. They had a absolutely beautiful, brand new dark room that they had just finished. And which leads to another funny story because everybody's prints were fogged. We're coming out of the dark room and we're fogged. And nobody could quite figure out what was going on. And the head of the department kept saying, well, you must be keeping your photographic paper in the trunk of your car. And so the heat of the that's, during the summer or whatever is fogging your paper. Well, one night I was in the dark room working and I looked up at the ceiling and I noticed that the safe light filters that they had put in the ceiling were the wrong filters. And so I went to him the following day and I said, you know why everybody's paper is fogged, don't you? And he said, yeah, because they're leaving it in the trunk of their car. And I said, no, you've got the wrong safe light filters in the ceiling. And he said, no, we don't. I said, yes, you do. Anyway, that's kind of how my schooling ended at that point.
Thanks for sharing. For you as an artist, do you have advice for students who are looking to become professional artists?
I do. I wrote down a couple things. Love what you do, first of all. I would suggest that for any profession, but especially an artist. And don't be afraid to think out of the box, try different things, experiment. That would be my largest advice, I guess, is not to seclude yourself into what you think is just what you want to do, is to open up your eyes, open up your horizons, and experience other things.
Great, thank you. And can you describe for us what your process is like, your artistic process?
Oh God. Well, I pretty much have a camera with me all the time. And I've told people that I consider, and this may sound kind of weird, but I I feel like I go through life with a disease. And what I mean by that is I basically walk through life with a viewfinder in front of my face. Not necessarily the camera always in front of my face, but that's how I see things. I'm constantly looking at everything, composing things, checking lighting, looking for interesting objects, textures, movement, light. And there are a lot of times I probably miss out on an experience that other people that don't have my disease experience. That being said, this is what I do. So I walk through life with this viewfinder in front of my face, so to speak. We'll come across something that I want to photograph, and I will photograph it usually in a variety of different ways. I'll photograph it horizontally, I'll photograph it vertically, I'll use longer exposures, shorter exposures, and then I bring all those images back, and I do what I call my first edit, and go through the images and decide which ones I feel I want to take to the next step. Once I do that, I usually put the images aside for a while and I let them cook, so to speak. And then I'll come back to the image and start working it. And sometimes the final image happens quite quickly. Sometimes it can take hours, sometimes a couple weeks. It depends.
Why Manzanar and why now?
I grew up in Southern California, which is about a 3.5-hour drive from Manzanar. For those of you that don't know anything about Manzanar, Manzanar was one of the 10 Japanese concentration camps that were set up by the US government during World War II. And all of the Japanese, not only immigrants, but also US citizens that lived basically west of the Rocky Mountains, were sent to these camps for the right after Pearl Harbor and for the extent of the war. I grew up in Southern California and knew nothing about the camps, knew nothing about this bit of our history, knew nothing about Manzanar. And when I basically accidentally came upon it and took the first photographs that I captured there, I needed to find out more about what took place at this location. I had gone to school with Japanese American kids. Nothing was ever talked about it. Nothing was ever taught about it in elementary or high school. I knew nothing about it. And once I started finding out more about it, it affected me in a number of ways. Number one, I'm Jewish. I have Jewish background. And so I very well knew what was taking place in Europe at the same time as what was happening here. Now, the camps, of course, were different there. They were called concentration camps, but many of them were actually death camps. But I really could not believe that here in this country, we had done this to 120,000 people and put them behind barbed wire and guard towers with armed guards watching over them for 3.5 years. And very few people know the story. And I think those were kind of the reasons why Manzanar kept calling me back. It was also there's a fascinating thing that for me, photographically, finding places like Manzanar, I find are very photogenic. And like most places around the world that are ruins or ghost towns or things like that, they have a draw because I think first of all, they tell us a story of something that actually happened there. And it's something that if you don't know about, you might want to learn more about. And documenting that through photography, I think, is an important way of documenting that history. So over 40 years, I kept going back to Manzanar and photographing different stages of what was taking place there.
And the bulk of the series of Manzanar is in black and white or grayscale photography versus color. Why did you choose that as the option?
A lot of the images were actually shot digitally or captured digitally in color and then turned black and white. I use black and white for certain subjects because I think it instills a bit of mystery and a bit of curiosity. You know, we all see, or most of us see in color. So there's a definite reality to it. Black and white, I think, forces your imagination to work a little harder and think about what that actually is and what it actually looks like. It's also a way of kind of putting a timestamp on things. And color photography was available back in the 40s, but it was not as prominent as black and white photography was. So
you've made so many powerful, beautiful, and poignant artworks in the Manzanar series. Do you have any favorites?
Yeah, my favorite is actually the one that the book is titled off of. Their Footsteps Remain. I came across that image by accident. I was out walking around the camp and came across what were the camouflage net factory foundations, where incarcerees actually made camouflage netting for the war effort. And as I was walking these large pads of concrete, I came across the footsteps in the cement. And it was the first time that I saw something or discovered something that was human. What I mean by that is footprint, signature, graffiti, something like that. And it really struck me when I saw these footprints that somebody was here, and I don't know who that person was, but there's a story I would really like to know that's behind those footprints. So that's probably one of the most powerful images for me. There's another one that's called Hospital Steps and Path, which is a steps in a path made out of the local granite that the incarcerees made, that the steps in the path led to the hospital. I think it tells an amazing story of the place. It's interesting because when I started thinking about what I was going to do with the Manzanar work, a lot of the images don't necessarily stand on their own as something that I would want to exhibit. But when you put them all together, it really tells a story. And it's probably the reason I decided in the end to do the book. Was I really wanted the images to be out there. I wanted people to know about this story and learn about this story. And I felt that if I put it in a book form, it was going to be one of the best ways to really get that information out there.
Portrait is one of the main genres that you explore in photography, and yet we don't see any photographs in the Manzanar series. Why is this?
Well, first of all, nobody lives there. There are national park rangers. There's visitors. Most of the people that lived at Manzanar or were incarcerated at Manzanar are gone. Very, very few of them are left. The camp closed 75 years ago. And so if you think about it, there are, like Holocaust survivors, there are a number left, but they are getting fewer and fewer. And I know that there have been a number of projects, a number of other photographers that have done photographic series with people that were incarcerated there during the time of the war. Two photographers who did photography there were actually Ansel Adams and Dorothea Lange, and show what's interesting, because the War Department would only let them photograph certain things and wouldn't allow certain photographs to be published. Most of their photographs that were taken in the camp show smiley, happy faces. And I have no doubt in my mind that not everybody was happy all the time.
Have you met any of the survivors? And
I have.
they
I
share their
have.
stories?
I've met a couple, and their stories are incredible. Each one has a different story, and probably the most amazing story that I heard through this process, at least for me, was that over the 3.5 years that Manzanar was there, there were a number of people in the camp which were fishermen. Some were commercial fishermen, some were doing it just for hobby and recreation. And they realized that there were trout in the local streams and lakes. And they found a way to sneak out of camp and go fishing. And they would hike up into the Sierra Nevada, sometimes for a week or 2 weeks at a time, camp out and go fishing. There was no roll call or anything like that, daily roll call at the camp. So if you could get out, nobody knew you were gone, really. Um, so right before the camp closed, there was a group of fishermen that decided, well, let's go back up to the mountains one last time. And an older gentleman, fisherman and an artist, asked if he could go with the group. And they said, okay. And they got up into the mountains. And once they got up there, he said, you know what, you guys go fishing. I'm going to go and do some painting. And he went down a different path. And a freak snowstorm broke out. The group that had gone fishing hunkered down in a cave. And after the snowstorm, they went looking for him, couldn't find him. They thought maybe he had gone back to camp. Went back to camp, he wasn't there. And a couple weeks later, some hikers found his body. And so they sent a group of people from the camp up to bury him. They buried him in an unmarked grave up in the mountains, and nobody knew where he was buried. And we went to print with the book in December of last year, January of last year. And 2 weeks before we went to print, a couple hikers came across his skeletal remains. And so we added that story to the book. And it was just kind of this wonderful closing, of the circle, so to speak. So, but that's one of the many stories that I've heard. So
it's a beautiful book as well, and there's a couple different variations on the format that it can take, or that someone can get it in, and you can tell it's a high quality production. Even has a really nice smell to it. But can you
love
tell
the
us a
smell.
little? Yeah, it does. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to make it into a book, your series of work?
So, like I said earlier, I just kind of got to the point where I thought the best way to present this work was in book form, although it has exhibited also. And I always have wanted to do a book. This is my first book. I'm hoping it's not going to be my last. And it was a wonderful experience putting the whole thing together. A lot of work, I will say that. A lot more work than I had ever anticipated. It probably took me about 2.5 years from start to getting the files to the printer to go to print. Partway through the process, my English skills are not all that great, and so my wife is my proofreader. And about halfway through the process, she came to me and she said, and she had gotten very involved in learning about the place and the whole process, and she had started to do her own research. And so she asked me if I would mind if I would consider her one of the authors or writers on the book. And I said, absolutely. So she's my co-author, and we co-wrote the text and all the images of mine. So,
is there a message that you want your audience to take away from your work?
Yeah, the most important message I want people to understand is that this happened and this can happen again. Even though we are citizens of a country and we supposedly have certain rights, those rights are very, very fragile. And I think we're in a way, we're kind of experiencing that today, um, with a whole variety of situations that we see going on in the news. And this is one of those stories that the civil rights of 120,000 people were literally overnight taken away from them. They lost their homes. They were taken from their communities, their schools, their businesses, and put behind barbed wire for 3.5 years, without cause. And you don't get that time back. And I think it's important for us to know about these stories and to realize how fragile our liberties are.
And I think that has to go into part of the reason why the book was also produced, as well as your large scale photographs. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, the large scale work has a lasting effect on the viewer when seeing it in that format or frame, I would imagine, compared to just seeing it on a computer screen where someone can easily sort of click through images fast and not really realize their potential.
Yeah, I think that in the old days, your slides and your negatives would end up in a shoebox in the closet. And in this day and age, it'd be interesting to know how many gazillions of images are captured on a daily basis around the world now, with everybody having basically a camera in their pocket, on their cell phone. And how many of those images actually get shown and get to see the light of day? It's actually one of the things I'm working on right now. Is I'm finally, after all these years, going back through all of my work, and the pieces that I deem most representative of my work throughout the years, I'm actually printing and putting into portfolios as a record of my lifelong work. So, and it's all great to look at it on a computer or on your cell phone or a iPad or whatever, but there's something about a book, holding a book, feeling a book, or a print, and that feeling that paper, and like you said, smelling the ink. And there's something wonderful about that. If you talk to most photographers that worked conventionally in dark rooms, they'll tell you about missing the smell of the dark room and the smell of the hypo.
Not the darkroom headaches, though, right?
Not the darkroom headaches, but that, just they missed that, and there was something wonderful about that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the last question: what's next?
What's next? Well, like I said, I'm working on creating these portfolios of my life's work, which I've got a long way to go, hopefully. So there'll be a lot more, and I have a couple other series of work that I have been working on. One series, I'm trying to think back, and I may have been working on this series longer than I worked on the Manzanar series. It's a series of roadside memorials from around the world. It's that splash of color that catches your eye as you're cruising down the highway at 70 miles an hour that probably was a car wreck or something of that nature, that the family has gone out to that location and left a memorial in honor of whoever was there. And there's other reasons that people create those, but I've been photographing those very possibly longer than the Manzanar project, and I have them from all around the world. So I want to do a book of that. And then my current work is called Solace of Space, which is also a continuing series, which is much more abstract images. So I'm always working on that. So
it's been a pleasure to talk with you today, Brian, about your work, and I want to thank you for sharing your time and your responses to these questions today. and look forward to having the opportunity of seeing your work in person again when the pandemic subsides.
That would be great. Thank you very much. This was fun.
It was. Thank you.